What is up, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to play this weekend in Gods Unchained. We're on GUDecks.com looking at the Mythic meta over the last one day because we did receive a balance patch this past week. So lots of changes have come to the meta. We're going to go over most of the card changes as we get to them, so I have a boatload of different decks to show you, but we are going to talk about one nerf before we do anything else, and that is the nerf to War's Wake. I think this is probably the biggest nerf to impact the meta as a whole. Now it costs 3 mana. Last week it cost 2. So before, Nature was able to pip into War's Wake on turn 1. And if Nature went first and played War's Wake on turn 1, it was almost impossible to remove. And that War's Wake would set up another 1-drop into Howler, which would set up Sing Song Satyr and then Wildfire. So Nature was capable of just making this huge board full of huge creatures really, really early and just, overwhelm their opponent. And because of that, a whole bunch of other tempo-oriented decks like Zoolight or any type of war deck or even a tempo magic or tempo deception, all of them were in a really rough spot because every once in a while their nature opponent would be capable of just making a board that was impossible to deal with. That's the reason why tempo magic was so good for the last couple of weeks, is because if their arcane transcendent could hit an Unbound Flames could clear a giant board that all started with the War's Wake. And then also in scenarios where your nature opponent or the nature player didn't get War's Wake on turn 1, they could always play it alongside Dagon on turn 5, which is very good. And at 3 mana, you can play it alongside Dagon on turn 6, and 6 is way later than 5 in Gods Unchained. So essentially, War's Wake used to do something really, really well, and at 3 mana, it just can't do that thing anymore. And it was the board states that Nature was able to create off of the back of War's Wake were just so dominant that all other tempo-oriented decks just couldn't really compete with that. So lots of other gods got a big secondary buff from the War's Wake nerf. All right, so now that we've gone over that, let's look at all the gods and their popularity, talk about their most popular archetypes, so you got a good idea of what you're going to be facing this weekend in your weekend rank challenge. So this week, or this day rather, this is just the 1 day chart. We're going to bounce over to the 3-day chart in just a moment. But as you can see, Deception is the most popular god, followed by Magic, which was the most popular god last week, then Light, then Death, and Nature at the second lowest slot with the worst win rate. Nature has never been this unpopular in the entirety of this What to Play over the weekend series. And then we have War, which has been the weak link of the entire Mortal Judgment set. So when you run into Deception, you might get anything. Deception can be very powerful as an aggro deck, making use of hidden creatures, and it can also be really good as a mid-rangey control deck, taking all of your stats and then stealing your cards and healing, being very annoying. Cards like Bound by Her Will alongside the stat reduction cards are incredibly powerful. Deception's really great at the moment right now, which makes sense why it's the most popular god. Then we have Magic, which did receive its fair amount of nerfs. Both Academy Apprentice and Unbound Flames was nerfed. The Unbound Flames nerf is pretty minimal. The Academy Apprentice nerf is way bigger. It used to be a 1-mana card, now it's a 2-mana card. It did get +1 attack, but it'll be way harder to pair it with something like a Unannounced Arrival. Before you could, on turn 5 with a pip, you could play both these creatures and then Unannounced Arrival for 3 damage AoE, and then also a 4-mana creature. You can no longer do that with the new much slower Academy Apprentice. And then the Unbound Flames, still pound for pound crazy removal. If you hit an Arcane Transcendent, this is still 8 damage to one creature and 4 damage to everything else, so it's going to be incredibly powerful every time. So Tempo Magic and any sort of Magic deck, definitely still viable. We've got 3 different Magic decks to go over when we get to the specific deck area. And that brings us to Light, which got a couple of buffs in this recent set, but its biggest buff is the War's Wake nerf. Like we discussed just a few minutes ago, Light is very strong. Now we have Death, which has been Heirloom Death exclusively for the past couple of weeks, but now not only is there Heirloom Death, there's also double attack over the line, new cool death. Nature, second least popular god. Nature is still going to be aggressive Nature. It's still going to be a very fine deck. It's just not going to be capable of those incredible starts it used to be able to do with the War's Wake. And then War is going to be some sort of creature-oriented deck that focuses on relics. Probably hits you in the face with a big relic at some point. Very exploitable deck. Relic removal just defeats it. Front lines just defeat it. War is very inconsistent at the moment, which is probably why it's the least popular god. And now let's jump on over to the 3-day Mythic meta just so we can see the difference in popularity. And as you can see, Nature is slightly more popular because 3 days ago Nature had access to that incredibly powerful War's Wake and now it doesn't. So when you are playing over the weekend, expect to see mostly Deception and Magic, and then probably Light's gonna be sprinkled in. Death might get more popular if that new version of Death ends up being good. But Deception and Magic should be the two gods you're thinking about most when deciding which deck you want to play this weekend. Alright, let's start things off with the most popular god of the day in Deception. Today I've got an Aggro Deception list as well as a Control Deception list. This Aggro Deception list is made by Sprink. We're going to start with Aggro Deception because I think Aggro Deception could be really good in this week's weekend ranked event. For the last couple of weeks, the Aggro Deception list we've been featuring have had either a full guild package or a little guild splash package with a Fermentari Instigator? Yeah, Instigator. However, Sprink has gone with just true blue aggro. He's got the Shadow Lethanons to be very annoying, Armor Lurker obviously to kill things. He's got this cool, he has the Lady Marcella and then the Dream combo of playing it on turn 3, and then pipping into Reflection Elementalists on turn 4 to get rid of the pesky Afterlife. We got Merrick in here, which is capable of dishing out insane amounts of damage, even without Baron of Whisper. You establish your Merrick, you play some Dark Knives, you go face with your recently Dark Knife Shadewalker and deal a ton of damage. Let's see, what else do we got in here? We've got 2 copies of Shadewalker, the main beat stick for this deck. Very easy to hide it turn after turn with your Orpheo's Distraction. This deck has both Assassin's Aim as well as that aforementioned Dark Knives to buff it up. And then besides that, we're doing fairly normal Deception-y stuff, taking stats away from opponents' creatures with cards like Shadow Step Backstabber, as well as Beguiling Blade. Stealing attack from your opponents is incredibly annoying. And let's see. Oh, we got this cool interaction in here. We have Loki and Disciple, which has been recently changed in the core set refresh. It is a 4-mana 4/4 with Hidden, and any character damaged by this creature goes to sleep. So if you happen to play against War, which is very unlikely, you might be able to stop their giant relic swing just by attacking with your Loki and Disciple, so that's always cool. Let's see, besides that, you have the Bound by Her Wills to steal your opponent's creatures. Let's see. Looks like this deck actually does not have any Umber Arrows, so Sprink's not stealing creatures as much as most Deception decks are, but why would you steal creatures when you can just make big ones and then kill them? In conclusion, seeing as that Nature is so unpopular at the moment, and Aggro Deception has historically been really weak against Nature, seeing as that all their random spells don't care about Hidden, this could be a really good week for Aggro Deception, seeing as other gods have a very hard time interacting with hidden creatures, and Aggro Deception has a lot of very high impact, big damage dealing creatures. So if you're a fan of the Hidden Rush Deception archetype, this could be the perfect week for lots of wins with that archetype. But that's about it for the Aggro Deception variation. Let's take a look at some Control Deception. This list was made by Into the Shadows. And it's a fairly common Control Deception build if you've been paying attention to Control Deception for the past couple of weeks. Just some standard control stuff. Got the Stone Skin Poison for some cheap, creature removal / slowdown. Hunting Trap to kill some stuff. Lightfoot Informant for some value. Umber Arrow, as well as Bound by Her Will to steal all of your opponent's stuff and ruin their day. Obviously, you've got all the great stat reduction cards like the Blade Borrower, as well as the Beguiling Blader. This deck has no Shadow Step Backstabber, but you can't have every single card. Also have 2 copies of Counterfeit in here, which is great in those Magic matchups. Whether it's Aggro Magic and you steal their Palace's Wand, or Control-y Magic and you take their Talisman, always good. And Skull Scepter has been raising in popularity for all the different Anubian decks floating around, so Counterfeit seems like a very decent choice. Cutthroat, very self-explanatory. If you play against one of those slower decks, you Cutthroat their win condition, then you have another win condition. Rapture Dance, also self-explanatory. We got the Wither Fingers plus Demo plus Helmna combo for lots of healing, lots of stalling, and then the Helmna, of course, becomes a giant beat stick. We got the Elkrich Dragon Spawn thing. Fancy New Dragon, does a lot of damage. And Guild Enforcer for that last little bit of value. This deck has, huge value potential. Not only are you stealing your opponent's stuff with Cutthroat, replaying powerful Roar effects with Toast-a-Piece, we've got the Helmna for big damage. We have the Jason for more value. Even the Lightfoots for a little bit of value. If you're in for some if you're down for some big grindy games and also find a lot of success, then Control Deception could be a great selection for this weekend ranked event. Alright, now let's move on to Magic. Today I've got 3 different Magic decks to show you. The first one we're going to look at is this Tempo Magic list made by Xborg. Like I said in the beginning of the video, Tempo Magic did receive a couple of nerfs in this last patch, but the archetype was incredibly strong and the nerfs were very fair. So Tempo Magic seems like it's still a very good archetype. We'll go over the nerfs real quick yet again. The first one is to Academy Apprentice. Last week it was a 1-mana 1/1 with the same card text, Echo, and Spell Boost +1. Now it is a 2-mana 2/1, so it's way harder to pair with your various spells that have big multi-spell burst turns. Also, you're gonna have a harder time weaving it together with something like the Unannounced Arrival. But all together, it's still quite a good card. It requires more planning. You might want to play the first version of Academy Apprentice earlier out in the game than you normally would have, so you can get the 1-mana copy in your hand for those big combo turns. But ultimately, this is, as far as Tempo Magic is concerned, Academy Apprentice is still a fine card. For School Teacher OTK, Academy Apprentice is probably gone forever, but in this archetype, it's absolutely fine. And then the other nerf came to Unbound Flames, which last week was most definitely the best card in the game, and may still, has contention for top slot. It's still a 5-mana card, still has the 2 Empower. It just now deals 4 damage to whatever you want, and then the Empower deals 4 damage to each creature. So it's capable of dealing 8 damage to a single creature and 4 to the rest, or 4 to face and then 4 to everything. So provided you can still pair it with an Arcane Transcendent to make the Empower cost, 5 mana altogether, it's still pound for pound some of the best AoE in the game. If you play this for its Empower on turn 5, you're going to run into very few board states where you're not clearing everything. So the card is still incredibly powerful. Besides that, this is a very standard Tempo Magic list. If you want to learn anything else about Tempo Magic, definitely check out last week's video. The whole video was a huge deep dive into all the variations of Tempo Magic. And the only strange thing of note in this guy's deck is he has a copy of Flame of the Second Shattering. I don't think I've ever read that card before in my life. It's a 4-mana spell. It deals 4 damage if you have 9 mana, which will happen almost never. It deals 8 damage instead. But just because you're probably not going to see 9 mana doesn't mean this is a bad card. If you've played Tempo Magic, then I'm sure you've been in scenarios where if you just top deck a Worm Breath, your opponent's dead. This is just one more, big burst damage spell. So very fine. You can probably replace this with whatever you want, or just run it. It should be, very passable. But either way, Tempo Magic slightly weaker than last week, but still definitely a powerful archetype. But let's jump into the next Magic deck, which is Dralamar Magic made by single question mark. Dralamar Magic is an archetype that would make a lot of sense to come back into popularity. It is the only Magic archetype that was not affected by the nerfs at all. Dralamar Magic didn't run Academy Apprentice or Unbound Flames, and it was it was quite a good deck for the past couple of weeks. Now the Magic's been weakened a little bit. This might be Magic's new best archetype. And on top of that, with War's Wake going away, the entire meta might slow down to the point where getting to 7 mana to actually do your Dralamar combo is more realistic. So if you're a fan of the Dralamar decks, this could be a fantastic week to bust it out. But this is not the last Magic deck to look at. Oh, also, I didn't go over the Dralamar combo. I've done it so many times, it's probably worth going over it one more time. The combo is, you play Helpful Aether Fox on anything that costs 3. It doesn't need to be Aether Snaps, it can be anything. You then play your 0-mana card that used to cost 3. After you play Dralamar, it refreshes those mana. Then you draw through your entire deck until you win, or you draw through your entire deck until you get 2 copies of Magic Inks, and then you just Magic Inks on Magic Inks on Magic Inks until you inevitably win. It's quite a simple combo. If you'd like more explanation, feel free to watch any of the last couple of What to Play Over the Weekend videos. We've discussed Dralamar a ton of times, but now let's jump into Control Magic. This list was made by Mirage, and as of this moment, he's only played 2 games with this deck, but he has been tweaking this archetype for the entire past 23-ish hours. So he's only played 2 games with this exact list, but he has played many more with very similar lists. And Control Magic seems like a strong archetype, like I just said with the during the Dralamar discussion. The meta is slowing down a bit, which means that these slower decks are trying to see 8 mana, have more viability, and Magic just has has lots of ramp, obviously. This Crystal Tech School Teacher, or sorry, Crystal Tech Scholar, is really, really powerful. It's 2 mana locks worth of mana, and the Echo creature you play, you'll probably play for the Empower effect. So you get to draw a card, really just help you get to those big, strong 7 mana turns. And as you can see, we are heavily incentivized to hit that 7 mana slot. We have 2 copies of City Planner, 2 demos, 1 Helm Nut, and 2 copies of Helion Elite. Just big frontline creatures stopping your opponent from hitting you and then dealing lots of damage. The entire deck is, fairly simple. You control the game with spells, you ramp up to the late game, you play a big guy. Tried and true strategy. Magic is looking really good. This slower Magic list might be really good in the meta. It might also get just eaten alive by controlled deception decks running things like Cutthroat and bounce effects. So definitely take a look at how the meta is shaping up on the weekend before you start up if you're thinking about Control Magic. But Control Magic could be a great choice for this weekend. Really, all Magic archetypes are still pretty good. Despite all nerfs, Magic is a great choice. But that is all. That's it. That's all 3 of the Magic decks. And next up, we'll be taking a look at Light. And next up is Light. This is a Zoolight list made by J-Rock. And about 90% of this deck is just very normal Zoolight stuff. However, there are a couple of neutral cards and supporting players of those neutral cards that I really want to hone in on. This deck is running a copy of Valkaz Master of Pain, which was recently buffed in this most recent balance patch. It is a 5 mana 5/4 with at the end of your turn deal 1 damage to each creature and heal each creature for 1. So it's really weak AoE every single turn on a fairly decently statted body. And Light has had this issue since the beginning of time where Light really doesn't have any AoE. They have that Eclipse card that gives everything -1/-1. But besides that, they really can't use a single card to affect multiple cards. And although Valkaz Master of Pain isn't dealing much damage in terms of AoE, it is dealing some, so it can make your trades much easier. You take some value trades with Netherborn Binders, get your opponent's side of the board to 1, and then the Master of Pain deals with the rest. Another issue that Light has always had is that they don't have a ton of card draw. And Master of Pain combos very nicely with CERN. When you play them both together, the Master of Pain will deal 1 damage to all creatures, both yours and your opponent's, and then heal them back up for 1, so the CERN will draw cards off all the creatures on the board, yours and your opponent's, to get you just lots and lots more resources. So, essentially, Valkaz Master of Pain, he's not the greatest creature stat-wise, he's a 4/5, which is normal for a 4-mana creature, but the fact that he's filling those 2 niches that Light just has never been able to fill successfully makes him very worthwhile. And then Kaya, Conduit of the Gods, is very, very similar. Just like what we said with the Master of Pain, Light doesn't really have any AoE. And Kaya's effect is, at the end of your turn, you deal damage equal to your spent mana gem split randomly amongst all characters. And that does include your opponent's face. So Kaya is not reliable AoE. She can miss entirely and send all the damage to your opponent's face. But if you've spent 6 mana and your opponent has 3 mana's worth of stats on the board, there's a pretty strong chance that Kaya can remove those, while developing a creature. And Light just has had no way of using 1 card to destroy multiple cards until now. So although she's not the most consistent, she is very convenient for filling that niche. And then another thing that Light has always had a hard time doing is damage from hand. Light obviously has cards like Prayer of the Desperate, like Asterius, that's capable of buffing existing boards to make a board that was dealing 5 damage, maybe deal 15 damage, but you need to have a board full of creatures that can attack that your opponent can play around. And then Light has relics, but none of them have Blitz or God Blitz, so they can't be immediately impactful. Whereas for 6 mana, you can play Kaya and potentially just deal 6 mana directly to your opponent's face to kill them. So, despite the fact that neither of these 2 cards are amazing on their own, they both fill in 2 different niches that Light has always had a hard time filling, and they do them fairly well. So I am a big fan of the construction of this Light list, and then, besides those cards, it's just normal stuff. You're playing cheap creatures, you're buffing them with Humble Benefactors, you're buffing them with Fellow Janissaries, you're buffing them with Prayer of the Desperate. Oh, you know what I almost forgot to mention? J-Rock very wisely has put in both Holy Enchanter as well as Protective Benediction in this deck, both of which are really outstanding with the Master of Pain. Obviously, Holy Enchanter giving things more health will make it so your Master of Pain is not killing off your own creatures, which is incredibly convenient. But the Protective Benediction is where it gets really spicy. Protective Benediction is a 4-mana spell. It reads, give 2 of the following effects to each friendly creature with strength 2 or less, +1 armor, frontline, protected, or +2 health. So this card is a bit misleading, because you probably think you're making 2 choices, but you're really not. You're picking armor every time, and probably 2 health. Sometimes protected, very rarely frontline, but you're always picking armor. Armor is the best keyword for a creature to have. It's the only one that doesn't go away ever, and it pairs so nicely with the Valkaz Master of Pain. If your creatures have 1 armor, then they're only healing. Then this reads, deal 1 damage to your opponent's creatures and heal yours for 1. So this combination of Master of Pain as well as Protected Benediction is incredibly powerful. Really like the construction of this deck. If you want to play Zoolight, I would definitely recommend a list that has these 2 neutral legendaries. And just like we said in the beginning, the War's Wake nerf is affecting everything like very drastically. The nature matchup was easily Zoolight's worst matchup, and you will not be running into that nearly as much as normal. So if you like creature-centric decks, then this could finally be the week for Zoolight. Alright, next up is Death. I've got 2 different Death decks to show you. The first one is an Heirloom Death deck made by Velo. And we're going to go over this one very quickly because the Nubian decks are a bit stale and the next Death deck is really cool. So this is Nubian Death. It's pretty normal. It plays Nubians and kills them off. It capitalizes off killing off the Nubians with Priestess of Taket, as well as Raving Necromancer. This deck also has 2 copies of Skull Scepter to capitalize even further off killing off its own creatures. It runs Deathwatch Curate, which is not particularly common in these Heirloom Death decks, but he's a 5-mana 5/6 that heals you, so that sounds pretty good. And it's Nubian Death, it's pretty strong. They play Land of the Dead and they win. Let's jump into Cool Death. So GU Dex calls this Sleep Death because it runs Siren of the Graves and Sulfuric Rain and stuff. So we'll go over the sleep stuff real quick so we can jump into the fun stuff. We've got Siren of the Graves, we've got Sulfuric Rain. These 2 cards put your opponent's board to sleep. Sulfuric Rain can draw you all of your combo pieces or mill your opponent. Burrowing Scarab does pretty much the same thing to a lesser extent. Both those cards can be brought back, or their effects can be brought back rather, through Canopic Hoarder. But the deck's main win condition / cool points thing is with this newly buffed card, Over the Line. This is a 5-mana Mortal Judgment spell. Your creatures perform an extra attack on your opponent's god. Right, pretty simple, definitely strong, and oh, I almost forgot to mention, this deck was made by H-Pain, and H-Pain has packed this deck up with a whole lot of Afterlife creatures that make big bodies for the over-the-line face damage. This deck has 2 copies of Rockdrake Egg, which has Afterlife. If you have 6 or more cards in your hand, summon a 5/6 Rockdrake. He also has 2 copies of Possessed Acolyte, which has Afterlife. If you have 15 or less health, summon a 6/6 Nether. And you'll notice that H-Pain has selected Neferu's Sacrifice God Power. So, seeing as that you're going to be fairly slow taking damage in the early game and also drawing cards with Neferu's Sacrifice, you should be able to get to that 15 health benchmark pretty quickly to make use out of your Possessed Acolytes. And then what's probably the coolest feature of the deck is the 2 copies of Deathwish Thanatar, which is a 16-mana 4/4. And this creature costs 1 less for each damage your god has taken. If you take damage and then heal back up, Deathwish Thanatar doesn't care. So if you fall down to 14 health and then heal back up to 30, Thanatar is still a 0-mana creature. And just like I said with the Possessed Acolyte thing, you will inevitably take 14 damage fairly quickly, making that Thanatar cost 0. And when he does cost 0, you can play him alongside the Over the Line to get that 4 to 8 extra damage of burst. So essentially, we're playing like a fairly I was going to say a fairly normal zoo plan, but not really. We're sort of sitting back in the early game. We're taking a lot of damage, putting their board to sleep, drawing through our combo, and then probably like trading off some Possessed Acolytes, flesh binding away some Rockdrake Eggs, making a big board, and then dealing a whole bunch of damage with that Over the Line. We have a couple more interesting cards of note. Oh, probably one that we should definitely talk about is Necronomics, a 1-mana spell, deal 5 damage to your god, which can be beneficial with those Thanatars and Possessed Acolytes in the deck, and then you refresh 5 mana. And as you can see, Over the Line costs 5 mana. So this is a very powerful combo piece. You can spill out all those big strong creatures, play those spells you need to proc your Afterlife creatures, and then just deal a whole bunch of damage. This is a brand new archetype brought along by this most recent balance patch. Last week, Over the Line also gave all your creatures -1/-1, and nerfing your own creatures' attack and health is not fun. So now that you're not weakening your own guys, this card is a lot more powerful. I am extremely excited to see if this archetype can be successful over the weekend. There's a strong chance this will be the deck that I try, but that's about it for Death. Alright, and the last god I want to go over is War. This is a relic-oriented war deck made by Clutch. Like I said in the beginning of the video, War is in a weird spot because their only real archetype is this play unrestrained power on a relic, make big relic, hit face. But this entire archetype just gets dismantled by front lines or relic removal. So War is not in the best spot at the moment. Consider this deck analysis mostly filler. War is not the deck to go with, but this is a War deck and you can play it. And if you really like War, then this is probably the best thing to go with, but realistically, War is not the move this weekend. Alright, so it is conclusion time. We've done all the talking, we've done all the thinking, so what is the word? What deck should we play this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained? Well, I think this could be the weekend of Aggro Deception. Aggro Deception has been a great archetype for a long time. And its worst matchup in Nature has never been this unpopular, so this could be the week for Aggro Deception. However, I am really pulling for cool new Thanatar Zoo, or Thanatar Over-the-Line Zoo, whatever you want to call it. But whatever deck you want to play, make sure you have fun, tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!